Hello and welcome to Megan's Mystical Mashup, a conversation about life, the universe, and anything in between. My name is Megan Rounds and welcome to today's show. Today's guest resides in Carlton, Georgia, in what she lovingly calls her treehouse with her 8-year-old dog daughter, Charlie. She is nanny to two boys ages 3 and 18 months who keep her on her toes. For her creative side, she paints and refurbishes furniture and dabbles in upholstery, writing, painting, upcycling, basically the heavier side of crafting. But her main hobby is photography. She also loves spending time with her niece and nephew and Sunday suppers at her mama's house. Her main modalities include clairaudient, clairvoyant, claircognizant, and she's also a medium and intuitive channel. She's been a member of the Lightworkers Lab for just over a year. In that time, she's attended the 2019 Bliss Retreat and participated in the 2019 Intuitive Intensive, where she's finishing up the requirements for certification. You can catch her in the lab light room every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern for her weekly show, Porch Time. She can also be found here in the main lab. So please give a warm Lightworkers welcome to Katie Pruett. Hi, Katie. Welcome.
Hey,
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Yeah. Woo. Feeling awesome. I'm so happy
Good.
to have you here today.
I'm so excited to be here. I'm a little nervous. When you were talking, I was like, who is that girl? She sounds cool.
And she is. And so now we all get to know how awesome you are, which is not what you said you were, but we all know it's true anyway.
Oh, Lord.
I've had you on my radar for some time now, and I'm just really happy to have you here today and for us to learn more about you and your story, your spiritual journey, your way to the light room, or the light room, well, their way to the light room, but also the Lightworkers Lab. And that's really my big first question for you is just, I think everybody has a story, and you have told me in the past that you have a story. And so let's start with, how did you, well, what's your story? What's your journey?
First of all, thank you so much, Megan. I'm like the biggest fan of your show. Like, I love it. And I'm not trying to take, I know I have to talk about myself, but I do just want to thank you. Like, it's truly like illuminating, like hearing people's stories, and I love it. So thank you. So I was like, where do I start with my story, right?
I can just interrupt and say it doesn't have to be linear. You don't have to start at the beginning. You can start wherever you want. And if we go backwards in time, that's fine. And if we go forwards in time, that's fine.
Yeah. I kind of zigzag, so we might do both.
Awesome.
But I was thinking if I had any, psychic abilities that were present when I was a child. And the one that I thought of my great aunt, who I was very close to. It was my grandmother's sister, and she lived a couple of houses down from my grandparents. And she was just very creative, very artistic, and she shared that part of herself with me and encouraged that part of my soul. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? But my cousin and I would walk over to her house, or we would ride our bikes over to her house and visit. She lived by herself, never married. And one day, I remember we were eating breakfast at my grandparents' house, and I just remember having the feeling of I wanted to get to her house really quick. I felt something was wrong. And on the way over there, we rode our bikes, and I just remember the feeling is still so real, like in the pit of my stomach, knowing that she was gone, but not wanting to believe it. And so we got there. I was 8 at the time. My cousin was 6. And my cousin doesn't remember her at all. which is,
Oh,
and we spent the same amount of time together. You know what I'm saying? So,
yeah.
but we got there and she didn't come to the door, you know, or wasn't there to greet us like she always did. And, you know, that was a confirmation. And she had passed, but it's just beautiful how I was thinking how that kind of stuff evolves on your journey, because I'm, like you said, I'm really into photography.
Yeah.
And right when I started getting into photography, my mother had a scrapbook of, her name was Mildred, but we called her Jewett, and of Jewett's photography. She was into photography. I had no idea. That's not the kind of like artistic stuff that we did.
Sure.
She was a photographer, and
Oh, wow.
a dang good one. Like, and I was just blown away because I was just kind of stepping into that myself. And around that same time, she, one picture that stood out, she took a picture of herself in the mirror and like captioned it selfie. It was like the
Wow.
first, yeah, it was like I took a picture of myself, a selfie, and I was like, whoa.
Seriously.
Yeah, the camera that was in the selfie, I found maybe a week later at a vintage store. That same make, model, style of camera, and so I have it now.
Wow.
Yeah.
That
So,
sounds divinely guided.
oh, of course, of course.
Oh my
Mm.
gosh. That's so fascinating that well, and that you received this huge intuitive, hit that something was going on when you were 8 and that you recognized it. I don't know how that affected you moving forward. Um, in fact, maybe that's a question for you, is how did that affect you going forward? It sounds like, and it's so neat how um, closely aligned you were to her, to the point that in a sense you're following in some of her same footsteps, like with that photography and the creativity. I mean, you have a lot of creativity, which is just, and you're pursuing it, which is what I especially adore.
And it's, yeah, the you say like the alignment and stuff. She, like I said, she never married. She never had any children. Um, and I found this out, you know, as an adult because, you know, like I said, I was young when she passed. If you hear a crunch, 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 that's my puppy eating her food. She was, had like an incredible passion for children. And I'm a nanny to two boys. And just things like that. I had no idea. And it's so cool. I love it. And I do feel like she's part of my team, you know.
Yeah.
I don't feel like there's any way she couldn't be. But my journey to I should have set my timer. Whoops.
Don't worry, I have one.
Okay. So to the lab, let's see. It was I first found Crystal on YouTube. And I was searching for, so just to back up a little bit, my grandfather, okay, let me get it together. Sorry.
No pressure at all. No, you're doing wonderfully. You are. I mean, I'm just fascinated by it.
But a little bit more about my childhood, because Kathy Sue talked about hers on your last show, and
Yeah.
being barefoot and running around, and that so much resonates with me. Like my mother's parents, on her side, I have a bunch of cousins, a bunch. And then on my dad's side, it's just my sister and me. And my mother's parents have been passed for a long time, like 20 and 10 years at least. But I just have so many wonderful memories of my childhood growing up there. They had a lot of land. I mean, talk about country. Like we didn't wear shoes. We ran around barefoot in the pasture, driving, Papa's truck. you know,
It sounds really free.
yes, and yes, I'm glad you said that because it was, and I kind of go back to that, to visit. I do because it was very free, very, untamed, very connected to the earth, very just pure,
Yeah.
But my grandfather was a preacher, and he preached at a little church, a little Southern Baptist church, I guess is the only way I've heard it described. But they were pretty strict. I would almost compare it to kind of like Pentecostal, but not quite.
Mhm.
But very small church, maybe 20 members at most.
Ooh.
But I did go with them. It was an experience that I shared with my grandparents. My mom and my dad, they didn't go to church, which, it's fine. It's fine. But like, my grandparents would pick me up and we would go to church and, my grandfather actually baptized me when I was 11. And that's really special to me. Something that
Yeah.
you know,
Well, it's neat that,
yeah.
yeah, I was just going to say it's really neat that he was the one to be able to baptize you,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know. And-
I eventually strayed away, I guess. Not that I was really ever, always felt I never really resonated with the fire and brimstone and hell or heaven. It just never made sense to me.
Mhm.
And so I just let it roll off my back. I didn't really let it trigger me, I guess. I was just like, yeah, that doesn't make sense to me, and just moved on, I guess.
Yeah.
So where was I?
Well, you were talking about, your grandparents and the land that they had and the, running around there, and then also, um, attending church with them. That was really your big exposure to church in general, and that not all of it resonated with you. And then before that, you were kind of talking about the Path to the Lightworkers Lab. So I don't know if there's a connection there, but even if
Hmm.
there isn't, um, to me, it sounds like that lays the foundation to, your childhood and your perspective, and what life was like as a kid always seems to affect us in some ways as we move forward.
For sure. And, it's just a time that I appreciate,
Yeah.
and I feel like it was decades ago. I mean, it was decades ago. Like, I still think of myself as like a kid, but
I hear you.
it was, before the internet and before cell phones, and like I'm very thankful that I've seen both. I've seen
Yeah.
both in my lifetime. Like I've seen. I remember before the internet, and I definitely remember when it came. And I mean, I was younger, but I'm glad I have that other perspective. But
I do too. It's
yeah,
one of the things I really value about being here in this particular time span. Is that,
yeah,
I mean, I'm older than you, so I probably remember more about before the internet. And but I also recognize just, I mean, I have a daughter who wasn't, didn't, she only gets to hear stories of us and our background and what things were like before then. And she also knows things that some of her friends don't because she has parents who are older than maybe some of her friends' parents are. So, like, somebody mentioned something about a heating thing, and she said, "That's a radiator." It's not like that's an old school thing necessarily, but none of her friends have ever heard of it. And they're like, "How did you know that?" You know, and,
yep,
um, and I think it's really nice to have that kind of historical perspective
I
within
agree.
one's lifetime.
Yeah, I agree. Because my sister, she's 9 years younger than me, and she was born in 95.
Mm.
And she doesn't have that,
Yeah,
even that 9 year gap. She doesn't have that perspective. So
things changed quickly.
they did, yeah. Um, but with my dad's side, like I said, it's just me and my sister. My dad had a brother, and he passed before I was born.
Mm.
And I have fond memories of them too growing up. It's just different because I was the only grandchild for a long time.
Mm. Same
And so,
here.
right.
Yep.
Um, so, I mean, they spoiled me. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. They spoiled me. My poppy is what I call my grandfather. Um, and my granny, like I was their princess. um, but I just didn't know any different.
Mhm.
That's just how it was. Um, and I actually the house I live in now, my granny owns. My grandparents used to live in the house like next door to me. My granny still lives there.
Wow.
Yeah. Um, so, and then my dad actually just built a house behind me. So
Wow.
it's like a Pruett compound we got going
Wow.
on.
That's
Um,
kind of, I can see some really great advantages to that, um,
mhm.
especially if you're a close family.
Yes. Yes, you're right. Um, but I'm getting to the lab, just setting it up.
Sure.
Um, so in January of last year, January 2018, my poppy committed suicide, and he did it in his house up here, and it was, obviously changed my life, um, and set me on this incredible awakening. Um, I'm gonna get emotional. It's okay.
Of course. I, I'd be surprised if you didn't get emotional. It's a
Yeah.
pretty big deal.
Um, so let's see. When he did that, I was living in this house, and there wasn't really signs of, I say signs, of, him
That something
saying
was wrong.
right. But his health had declined
Mm.
rapidly in the past, previous years, and before he was very, you know, always on keeping them roads hot. Like, just he was that guy. Like, in my perspective, he was like the coolest dude I knew. Like the boss. Like, very much a fun guy, always on the move until his health got too bad to where he couldn't be, and he
Mm-hmm.
was pretty much homebound. Um, but yeah, it was in the middle of the night, um, after he was a really big Alabama football fan,
Yep.
and it was they won the national championship, and it was in the middle of the night after that they won, that he did it, and then it was close enough for me to hear like the shots.
Oh, I'm so
And
sorry to hear that.
well, thank you. Um, but I think it's important to talk about because
I do too.
it's, you know, it's people don't know what to say, when something like that happens. I I definitely don't still, but I know not talking about it is part of the problem.
Hmm. I would 100% agree with that.
Right. So, it was all very surreal, after that, the funeral, and it was from about January to March. I was in a very deep, dark place, probably like the darkest place I've ever been in my life. I didn't go anywhere. I didn't, I was, it was rough. I isolated myself. I barely took care of myself.
Yeah.
Um, and also my my wife and I, had been separated, like, and she had moved out not long before. It'll get better, I promise.
Oh, no, that's okay. I'm not looking for
Yeah.
light and happy. I want to hear your story, and I am so grateful for your sharing this with us. It sounds like I mean, you had a walls are crumbling around you kind of experience. It's
I did.
starting to sound like.
Yeah. 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 So he died in January. She had moved out in, I think, December. It's kind of jumbled. Um, and then in March, she decided to move out of state. And so I was like, well, I didn't think I could get any lower, but then
Mm.
here I am. But from that place, started to rise up. I guess there was no, other way but up at that point. Um, and I I went and got a psychic reading in Atlanta at a woman that actually had went to randomly in 2012. I just walked into the shop, and um, she had had an opening, and she told me some stuff, and it all ended up happening.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I went back to her and scheduled a reading, and when I was there, I remembered that she was no like she had wrote a book called Suicide from the Other Side, and she
Oh,
was not kind of known as like the suicide medium, but like, I mean, she wrote a book on it. Like, she has a lot of experience with it. So I was like, oh my goodness, like, wow. And
yeah.
this, I went to her hoping to connect with my poppy, because I just knew that he wasn't in hell. I don't personally believe there is a hell. And I was looking for, I guess, confirmation, validation. Um, I don't know.
And he was the preacher?
No, this
Okay.
was, yeah,
Okay, thank you.
yeah. This was my
On your
dad's.
father's side. Yes.
Hmm.
Okay.
My mother's parents have been passed for a while now. Yeah. Um, but my granny's still alive. Um,
Living
hmm
very close. What, right behind you? Next to
Right
you?
there,
Yeah,
right
there.
there. Yeah, yeah. Um, so let's see.
So I assume you picked up that book and read it.
I did. Well, I got a reading from her,
Mm.
and he. I won't go into it, all the way, but he came through,
Mm.
and it was pretty fresh, after he passed. Basically, she did confirm that he was, not in hell, right? And the way she saw it is he was carried in by two angels. So he was in a state of, I guess, I don't know, being held in love, um, but maybe not quite ready to go into the light completely, if that makes
Sure.
sense.
Yep.
So, but as hard as that was, it did help me because I knew he was. I just wanted to know where he was, right,
Hmm.
and know that he wasn't
He was okay.
burden,
Yeah.
and because that's what I went back to those roots of like what I was taught in church, and it just because that's what I knew, and it didn't resonate. And so I read the book, and I was like, wow, okay. It makes a lot of sense. It's a really good book. It's a pretty short read too, but let's see.
Did that book talk about how, um, I mean, does it give like a general sense of what happens to people after suicide? Is that, or is it like
Yeah.
perspectives of those who have committed it from beyond? Or how is
It's
the book set up?
It's both. It's
Okay.
she like shares her own experience, of her, like a family member that passed, and it's both. It's a lot of information. I mean, and I'll be honest, like I don't know that I completely resonated with all of it,
Hmm.
and that's okay,
Yep.
But most of it for sure. Um, and I mean, she's an amazing. I would love to get another reading from her because she's amazing. But so I got that reading from her, and then I guess I needed more confirmation, and so I go on YouTube and I'm
Mm.
searching. What happens after you die and you commit suicide, or something to that effect, and I come across Chrysaline Compton, and she's talking about um, suicide and how, it was a very short video, but I'll send you the link if you want to include it.
Definitely.
Um, but she's just talking about how, when we die, we it's just our bodies that die, right? Like, um, and maybe it was two videos. Anyway, I found her and then quickly started watching all. That's why I'm like, which video was it? Because I found that one and I
Sure.
was like, who is this woman? Like, just started digging into all of her content, and I was like, wow, like I really, really, really resonated with the majority of the stuff that she was saying, and I've never had that experience before where somebody's like validating what I had thought, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
And just so,
And
you
putting
know,
words to things like that, it's
yes,
like,
words, exactly. Those
yep.
things, yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing to me how many people I've had on this show, but I imagine the people I've had on this show represent many more within the Lightworkers Lab who find videos in their time of need of crystals, and a lot of them do exactly what you've done and kind of soak all of them up.
Right?
And that is their path to the Lightworkers Lab. A lot, I mean, like
Yeah.
a huge amount of time.
I love it.
I
Yeah.
do too. She's like a
And
beacon.
she is. I mean, and I, you know, in some of the videos, she's like, join me at the Lightworkers Lab, and I would just be like, okay, next video,
Yep.
and I heard her talk about it. Oh, sorry. Um, and finally one day, that was probably in March of last 2018, whatever year, whatever year it is, that I found her, and then it was probably about July when I finally joined the lab. And when I joined the lab, it was like even more mind blowing, and it couldn't have come at a better time,
Mm.
honestly, because with between like March and July, I kind of just went inward, um, watching them Crystal and Compton videos and actually applying, the stuff
Mm.
that she was saying,
Ooh, good.
looking at things from different perspectives and kind of, um, you know, coming out of that dark place, um, and like digging myself out a little more and more, but as a new person, if that makes sense.
Totally.
With a new understanding.
It kind of
Uh,
reminds me of the Phoenix, and how like
yes.
they burst into flames, turn to ashes, and are reborn. And even though they may look the same, they're not on the inside.
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, I love that. But and so by the time I did join the lab, I was still like, super new, but I wasn't like, what's a chakra? Like I kind
Yeah,
of knew, you know, a little bit, just
hmm,
a little bit.
sure.
But so joining the lab and then meeting all these people that were like talking about all this stuff that I've thought about all the time, still in my hermit phase, honestly, and still grieving, and I received some beautiful readings from people in the lab. A lot of beautiful readings, actually. Um, Forever grateful. And it's crazy that I'm doing that myself now. Like, when I think about it, I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm kind of doing that too. Like,
Yes, you are.
um, but yeah, so I joined in, it was July, and then I was looking back, trying to think the first psychic development circle, I guess, that they had maybe was October of last year. And that's the first thing that I dove into. And that was with Lauren, Antifermo, and Crystal.
Yep.
And it was very casual. And it was like, here's how to do this stuff. Let's practice it. And it really opened me up, and I surprised myself, because I was like, oh wow, like I'm not crazy. Like,
No, not at all. I have to say, my experiences with you in there, I had assumed you'd been doing it for a while. I mean, you're so connected. You are always very right on with, the different practices and things like that. You were getting these amazing intuitive hits, and it's like, wow, she's really good. I had no idea you were new. And
uh,
not that that matters, but good.
yeah, that's the first kind of thing I did like that at all. And I loved it. And then, a couple of months after that, they offered the intuitive intensive, and I I did that. And it literally, I can't even begin to describe how much it's changed me. Like, God,
It's deep. It's
it's
got
deep.
a lot of information in it. So those of you who are watching who aren't familiar with the Intuitive Intensive, this is the second year it's been offered, I believe. And then I know they're planning for a 2020 version as well. And it's just a lot of really amazing information and practice, that I don't remember how long the whole program is, but then there's an option for a certification piece that follows, which includes more practice and, certainly some challenging elements to that, including, reading crystal, for example, crystal and Compton, not crystal like the crystal.
Right.
you know, and that can be intimidating for people. And Trisha Carr is the other person who is a very important part of it. And there's just so much information, both as a part of the main program, but also in addition to that, just bonus information that was offered. That was like, wow. I went through it, but I have not completed it. For me, what's worked with me is that I progress beyond where I did, like this year, I progressed beyond last year, and it's calling to me again to go back and revisit and progress beyond where I dropped off. And I dropped off in
Ooh.
part just because of all the time and just chaos in my life, and I just couldn't. And what I find is that's actually an important piece for me um, because I had to absorb that and integrate it into my life in order to be able to move to the next phase. That's just how it works for me. And everybody is very different with this. And what I love about this program in part is that they are very understanding of that. So we have a whole year to go through it. But I love that you've gone through the certification, and you're kind of in the, I assume your program that in the Lightroom is a part of the review process. Is that, or are they in
Um,
conjunction or not? Because there are different things that are required for certification.
Not necessarily.
Okay,
I think it counts towards it, but I'll be doing it anyway because I love
good.
it. Yeah. Um, but
Well, can I
yeah,
ask? Oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. No, go.
I was just curious, how have your family received this life change in you?
Well, they will see because my sister knows, my mother knows, my cousin knows, and my best friend knows.
Hmm.
And that's all. And
Hey,
so
that's
they'll
okay.
see. I think it's appropriate, like, that I'm coming out on camera, like, because like when I came out when as gay when I was 17, but I didn't. It wasn't like intentional. um, Basically, I had snuck away to Atlanta Pride, and my mom realized I was gone and not where I told her I was
Oh,
gonna be.
yeah.
And I was still exploring. Like, I really just wanted to go just to see what it was like. And even though I knew, but I wasn't ready to tell people that, especially my parents.
Sure.
But um, somebody ended up. So there's a parade on Sunday, and somebody ended up seeing me on, like, in the parade on the news.
Well, I was thinking it was something like that. You know, you're very photogenic. I can imagine that, you know, it's like you've got the parade, you've got you there, somebody's going to take a picture. And the fact that it's on the news and your family sees it or other people, you know,
Yeah, and that, well, my mom didn't, but then they,
somebody told her.
yeah, and
Small town.
super. Aw. But yeah, my dad doesn't know, and my
Hmm.
grandmother doesn't know, and I just haven't shared it with them because I don't know. I
Well,
just, yeah,
well, do you need to? I mean, I think
no,
that's an
yeah,
interesting
exactly,
thing. It's like you share it with who you want to share it with who you're
right,
comfortable sharing it with, but also this is my perspective, of course, and people may very well disagree with it, but it's not everybody needs to know all of your business. Even
yeah,
family, it's who you want to know. And sometimes it's hard to keep secrets from people you really care about. Um, but at the same point, it's not always going to benefit them to know. And it's not about whether or not it benefits them, it's what's best for you.
yeah,
And so I really appreciate that. It's like, it seems like the people who are supportive, I hope they're supportive, are the
yes,
people who are aware. And I feel the same way with the lightworker things. I don't go out and tell everybody. I did for a little bit because it was kind of liberating to just say, I'm a light worker. And then, wow, there's really interesting responses to that. And that isn't the same thing as coming out as gay, but there is an aspect of coming out to it because there's so many
yeah,
different perceptions and biases about it, you know, and so I think what's interesting to me, though, is that that happened by accident, which I then go with, you know, my word is divine timing. There's somebody else who's watching right now who had a similar experience recently, not my story to tell, but another thing where it's like, oops, and I'm now people know. And I kind of personally
mm.
prefer that approach because
Right,
we don't have to control it then. It's whenever it's supposed to happen, it happens. If it happens and people are aware of it, then, well, I guess it's the right time, right?
yeah, it is, and it's crazy, like, how quickly everything happens too, like, that started in October of last year. We're
Yeah.
almost in
Well,
October
just about there.
now, and now doing my own readings. Like,
Yeah.
it, it blows me away. But
Well, do you believe that when things happen quickly, it's because it's the right thing? Or do you have, I
yeah,
mean, I do. That's kind of my big sign is when it seems, when doors open, good, you know, it's like it means you're supposed to walk through.
exactly. Yeah, I agree. And it is what it is that it took a tragedy like that to kind of
Yeah.
catalyze something like this, but it just goes to show, there can be a lot of beauty can come from, you know, like tragedy,
Yeah.
and transformation and healing, and you know, I'm just grateful.
Yeah. Well, and you know, my understanding is that a lot of times, traumatic event, tragedy, and it can be with our own life, you know, with our own personal selves or with other people, often uh, spur people into some form of awakening. You know, it's unfortunate that sometimes that is how it works because it's like you're already having, you know, the challenges of facing the tragedy, whatever it is, or some form of trauma. But it seems like sometimes that vulnerability is what's required for the current walls, you know, our current belief system, our current habits and patterns and everything to fall away. I'm personally finding that myself. It's fascinating when I'm able to be thoughtful about it in that way. I was just recently realizing how, I was telling somebody, because I was at this event with some people. It was the final meeting after a 6 month, couple of meetings a month kind of thing. And I just broke down, not because it was a final thing. There was something that this person had said, and it wasn't a bad thing. It was it was like a meditation. And I just started bawling. And I ran out of the room because I didn't want to be there to express this level of emotion, because that's something that I'd been conditioned about. Everybody there was very understanding and accepting and compassionate, but it was me who was like embarrassed by those things. And it was just another of many, many walls. I just keep calling them walls because it's like the eggshell, except I had like 18 layers of it, but they all just seem to crumble at about the same time.
Yeah.
And no, I forgot what I was. Oh, I told this person, I recognize chaos. I have studied chaos. I have studied complexity and uncertainty and all of those things, and I've always really enjoyed learning about them. But right now I am chaos, and it's really hard to understand, even though I have all of this education around it, what to do, other than that I have always understood. Because it's like, you know what you do? You present in it. You allow it, even though the urge is to fight and to fight and to move. It's like always keep moving. But if you're in chaos, you're already always moving, and it's like, in ways that you can't predict. So for me, it's like, well, this is probably the biggest, most important time to just be and allow. And that is not always my norm.
I understand. It's funny you said you feel you are chaos. Like when you said that, I know you've talked about freedom and how you've always valued freedom, and I resonate with that. Like freedom is my jam. Like gotta gotta have it. But when you said that, I thought that I was thinking how I feel so free, like more free now than I ever have. So I am free, and that freedom is like, what do I do now? It's a different kind of freedom. It's not a freedom that is there in case I want to run away, right?
Yeah.
It's a freedom to truly be who I am, do what I want to do, and share my gifts.
Yes.
And it's intimidating because I've never been there. I've never been there, and it's exciting too. But that word freedom it's evolving.
Yeah.
My definition of it.
Mine too.
Good.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your saying that, because I think it's a really important piece, is that, freedom for me used to be similar to what you had said. It's like freedom to kind of to be or do what I want, but in a more external way, without giving myself authority to really understand what my own truth is and what my soul has been telling me that I've really been ignoring in favor of what I think expectations have been of me, and kind of following along with that, and then being free to say, forget it, I don't like this, but not really recognizing what it is that I'm leaving for. And now it's all about, creating my own definition of freedom and what it means to me personally, without paying, well, I shouldn't say paying attention, but without letting those other influences affect me the way they used to.
I agree.
And I think that really is a big piece of what transformation is, what evolution is, all of those. Wow. That's pretty deep. Cool.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
And, the more in charge of myself, the more sovereign I feel, just in my being, the more free I feel. It doesn't feel like that would make sense, but with like the and then the but it does, like and you can come up here, baby. Come on. Oh, she's being shy.
Well, I haven't heard her eat at all, but Katie had told me earlier that her puppy wants to eat more when she's on live than she typically does otherwise, and she doesn't eat all that much otherwise. So it's like, so she lets her eat when she's on her live, which is great. There she is. Oh, she's cute.
She's my Charlie girl. Oh my goodness.
She just wants to share the love.
No, you can sit right here. You can sit right here.
So I'm going to be thinking about the sovereignty. I really resonate with what you said about being sovereign makes you feel more free, and recognizing, the big thing for me is recognizing and allowing our own power to be there. Yeah, or I just say allowing our own power. That's been a really big learning of me recently too, is just how much I have through most of my life tried to stifle that power. And that power in a lot of ways includes the emotions, the intuitive aspects, all of the clairs, all of the things that we learn about in the Lightworkers Lab are the things that when we were really driven by our external environment more than ourselves, we're concerned about not, well, I should speak for me. I've always been so concerned about other people's judgments of those, and following this line of expectations, even though I felt free in the process. All of the things that are changing now in my life are telling me just how free I wasn't, because I wasn't accepting my own sovereignty, my own power, my own authority. And I'm really happy that this is taking place for you way sooner than it has for me. I am grateful that it's happening to me now, despite the fact that sometimes it sucks. But,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
I love to hear when it happens sooner for other people, so you can live more of your life in that level of freedom and sovereignty.
Yeah, that's a beautiful point. Yeah. But what is time?
Exactly.
I'm
Yep.
I'm glad you're realizing it now too. I mean, I'll probably realize it in a different way,
Well,
at
I
a
think,
different age. I
yeah,
think we all do. Puppy stop.
I think there are phases. I think there are cycles. I'm very much into the concept of the spiral, because I have circled around and circled around and circled around, but every time I've circled around, things have been different. It's not like, like some people think that if you return to the same kind of experience or those patterns in our lives, which now that I am at this age, I can recognize life cycle patterns way better, things from very different parts of my life that are coming around again.
Yes.
But they're very different in a lot of ways. It's just the pattern itself and how it appears seems the same, but what's underlying and the lessons to learn and the choices I have to make are very different. And
Completely.
so, yeah, things are going to probably come around again, maybe in one way, shape, or form, but it's always something new in the mix.
Yeah. That reminds me
Yeah.
of, like you said, like patterns and stuff. That reminds me of, like, one thing I learned very quickly in the Lightworkers Lab was boundaries. And
Yes.
before I was like, what are those? Like, I've
Yeah.
never heard of those, like, I don't know. Yeah. So boundaries for me have been super helpful, and hard, to implement. And not that I have, unreasonable anything, which I have to tell myself, I have to remind myself. Um, but that is something that really has shifted me. Is it's okay to have boundaries. It's okay
Yeah.
to, not go do something and not feel guilty about it.
Yeah.
It's okay to, have a day to myself and, not talk to anybody if I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to.
Yeah.
Um, just letting myself off the hook, has helped, because that's not my natural state.
Yeah.
um,
I think it's fascinating how, I mean, I look at it from an empath perspective, and I'm still very much in a kind of philosophy stage around what it means to be an empath. But a big part of what I've been thinking about recently is, you know, the empaths are what the way it's shown up for me is it was a form of coping. If it coping in an environment where I didn't feel threatened physically, but it was more like there was some conflict and I didn't feel like I belonged, and there was some volatility, but not in a violent way. But I learned how to adapt quickly to regularly changing environments. And that in many ways gave away my power in favor of being helpful to the other people around me, being able to predict what's going on around me. I mean, I really have a pretty spot on ability to predict, and which is an amazing light worker, piece, right? So it's like what claircognizance, maybe clairsentient, no, claircog, in a sense,
precog, right?
Yeah, yes, thank you. And but I think a big part of that was really conditioned, and it's just how I reacted to those conditions. It's not about any of the other people. It was me really wanting to be maybe a glue factor, for the people around me, to help them harmonize and to help me feel better in the process. So it was self-serving in that way. But because of it, because this has been the way I've been for so long, that now it's that piece on boundaries. I read a book years ago called Boundaries, and it has a religious theme to it, which I did not grow up religious, but that the main points of that were so powerful for me that it was enlightening. It's like, wow, boundaries, how did I not know that? And of course, Crystal's Dominion is another very important aspect of that. But even since reading those books, it's so easy for me to fall into those other patterns of accommodating everybody else, that I always have to be intentional around boundaries and dominion, because it's so easy to give away my power, because that's been my norm. It requires a complete change of thought and habit.
It does. And it's, and because you'll go back to those habits like naturally, and you have to, and sometimes it's a this and a this,
And it's one thing I've just always been fascinated about is how we resort or revert to those habits when under stress. It happens all the time in companies. It's like you can really see what a company culture is like by seeing what happens when they're in stress, because that's the default. Then they're trying to be different outside of that, but they don't have to try, because that's kind of their, I don't want to say the nature, but I think if you've been in an environment for 30 years and you've operated under the same way all of the time, and you can try to change and try to move beyond that until it becomes the default, anytime some kind of stressor, and especially a big stressor, comes up, it's super easy to just go back to that baseline. And to me, I think it's an important part of change and transition, because if we're not aware that that's our default, we can't move beyond it. We just beat ourselves up.
I so agree, especially with the empath part, because first of all, just learning that about myself, that, I am empathic, very much so. And, just recognizing that, first of all, was like game changer.
Huge. Big time. Yep.
So like just asking myself, is this mine? Like that was, boom. Not like boom, it's done, but just being aware,
yes. At that time when I mentioned when I broke down just a little while ago, and that final meeting of that group, it was in a church environment, and everybody seemed composed, but it wasn't until I got home and maybe the next day when I started asking if it was mine. And I think it was a combination. I don't think it was all mine, because I'm like, I don't even know why I'm crying. It's not like there was something he said that made, the facilitator, that resonated with me, but the reaction was so much stronger than the words. And I'm like, I can see why that's why I might tear up, but there is no reason to have, if you've ever watched the movie Something's Gotta Give, she cries for like days and days and days after this breakup. And I felt like that person because I'm just like, "Ugh!" I'm like, what is going on? I don't even know why I'm crying.
Right.
But it didn't occur to me because I was around other people who, and my own default is like, I have to be in my own space where I can ask those questions. I was around
I,
people who,
mm-hmm.
weren't light workers in that way. They have
Yeah.
their own light worker abilities, but they don't know it necessarily. They don't talk about it. And here I am like, I just couldn't even ask that question. But the fact that I asked it later made me question whether it was mine. Just the fact that I knew to ask it because something
Right.
nudged me.
Yeah.
I also had a precog about that experience too. Like before I went, I wasn't going to go, and my husband encouraged me to go, and I'm glad he did. But I'm like, but I'm going to end up crying, and it's like it wasn't. I don't believe it was self-fulfilling prophecy as much as I could actually see myself crying and running out of the room, and I'm like, well, that's interesting. So I had like
right.
a visual.
I wouldn't. Yeah. I wouldn't just see that for
Yeah.
for no reason. Yeah. I've had those experiences too. But what the thing you said about like being empathic and how that's formed mostly as a coping mechanism, like in childhood, I resonate with that because I felt like that, like it was my job to, I guess, be the peacemaker, the one like everybody just get along, and I think too, actually, I don't know why this is coming up, but I'm just going to talk about it. So when I was, I think like 4, yeah, I was 4. My parents are divorced, and they were separated at that time, and I was staying with my mother, and I was actually supposed to be at my dad's that night, but for some reason I stayed with her, and somebody broke in on us and tried to rape my mother. She fought him off, and I woke up, and it startled him, and he ran away.
Wow.
So she was physically, she was fine. But I just think, I often think if I hadn't been there that night,
Yeah.
and because that's actually one of my first memories, I think, because it was so traumatic,
Yeah.
One of my first memories is like waking up, in the middle of the night,
Wow.
to that, and her trying to calm me down, and like, it's okay, because that's what he was telling her to do, right? And then I it's vague, but I think I stood up or something, and he got scared, and that ran away. But that intuitiveness is so like connected to the empathic coping mechanism, I think, too, sometimes,
Yeah.
um, but my mother's very empathic too, so I've seen that modeled a lot, actually, from her, um, which I'm very thankful for. But something Crystal was actually saying the other day is how, when we are like the peacemakers of, the household, it stuck with me because she said we can send out like energetic forerunners, without even knowing it, just to sense,
Yeah.
when people were coming home, when, she was like, I just knew when somebody was about to be there, because, my energy was searching for that, I guess.
Yeah.
Um,
Huh. That's so interesting. There's just a little story. I had been thinking about a woman that I used to spend a great deal of time with. She's older than me. I knew her and her husband. And we spent, it wasn't a lot of time, but over the course of maybe a year or maybe two, we just connected every now and again, had coffee, talked about mainly work things, just because we were consultants at the time. And she had entered that was years ago. And she had been entering my mind more recently, and I just ran into her yesterday. And she looked at me before I had recognized her and said, I wasn't all that surprised because I had actually thought of her. Uh-oh, where did Katie go? Because I had thought of her. I'll just finish the story. So anyway, it was that whole energetic reaching piece. I wonder if, she just totally lost the connection. It looks like her face is still showing up in my little icons of people who are watching, but I am thinking she's not here right now. I am just going to see, though. Here she is. Awesome.
Sorry, I
Yay!
don't
No,
know.
that's okay.
Somebody called. I don't know how somebody got
Oh,
through. Turned off my notifications. I turned Do Not
oh
Disturb.
my gosh. Yeah,
That's
we've been
weird.
talking about how the things
Yeah.
that can interrupt, but it happens. But I'm glad you were able to come back on. Anyway,
Sorry
so I
about that.
finished that story, but we have about 6 minutes left.
Okay.
So, just while I have you here, in case they try to call back, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I know there's more to your story that maybe you didn't get to today. And if that's the case, well, I'll have you on again and we can talk some more. I'd love to do that, even if we don't talk about your story. I just have to say, somebody put a comment, Garrett, thought that maybe she ascended. Just have to say, I think that's a great
Garrett, oh my gosh. Maybe I did. I'm back.
It was funny.
I love Garrett. That's
Oh, funny.
hilarious.
Yeah, that was funny. So thank you so much again for being here. I really appreciate it. And you just have such a sweet, special soul. I just adore you. So thank you again. Thanks to all of you for joining us today on the live, and for those of you who are watching the replay. And I wish you all a magical, mystical weekend, and we'll see you again soon.